Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. It looks like everyone is in the room now. I keep admitting a few more people. I am Jennifer Perrow, and Paul White is with me, and we are happy to have you all here to learn how to beat the statistics and build a successful business. We're going to try and not take too much of your time today, but also give you a handful of information that you can take and apply to your business. What we'll be discussing today is what the statistics say about small business success. It's not pretty. The importance of your numbers, creating predictability, and then how to actually do it all. If you wouldn't mind humoring us for a minute, just so we can be sure to speak to each of you as personally as possible. If you would take a minute and just in the chat, tell us a couple of things about you. What industry you're in, how many years you've been in business, and the number of employees that you currently have. And if it's just you, that is great. Just say, just me. Let's see, and we will go from here. So Caitlin's in roofing and home exteriors. Fabulous. How long have you been in business and how many employees do you have? Would love to be able to do that. 2.5 and 7. Congratulations. You've made it past a pretty big threshold number, Caitlin.
Exactly.
Oh man. Let's see, Campbell, 12 years in business, 7 employees. This is a magic number, apparently. Paul, how long have you and Leanna had your business?
Yeah, so we've been 3 years with the bookkeeping business.
Okay. All right. All righty. And it's just not
Two-
just, it's the two
With
of you.
the two of us, and we have some part-time employees as well. We have
That's fabulous.
two part-time and another in training. So,
Okay. Oh, I didn't know about that. Congratulations.
yep.
Um, I am a solopreneur. I've been in business for 3 years now. Actually, I guess closer to 3.5, which is kind of crazy. Let's see, Dan is business brokerage for 2 years, and 20 years in management consulting. And Dan, I completely understand your sentiments about no employees. Yeah, there's that joke, business would be wonderful if it weren't for the people, and the people could be clients and the people could be employees. But the good news is, and some of what we'll be talking about today is how you can actually make that not so um, stressful and actually a productive option. So, all right. Well, this is helpful. Thank you all. We'll go ahead and jump in. Just to quickly introduce ourselves, I'm going to start with Paul. He is a fractional CFO. He and his wife own P&L Business Services, and they provide fractional CFO as well as accounting and bookkeeping services. And Paul, I don't know if you want to take a minute and share a little bit about your
Yes.
background.
Yeah, so my background has been corporate world for 16 years, primarily with GE and the Genworth spinoff and finance and multiple roles there. And then we've started another business. So had two businesses that we've started up, and see a need to help business owners get a handle of the finances and the books and making sure they're pricing appropriately to be profitable. So that's our area of expertise, and setting up a process to run the numbers and help people with that, because it's very detail oriented and most people don't like doing it. So it's a good service to provide. So that's we focus on we have clients anywhere from 100,000 in revenue to 5 million. So it's kind of a broad range there, but the 5 million size client, that's typical, about probably where I would say we would stop
Mhm.
at that level. So
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, it's great to have both of those sides of the accounting and finance world under one roof.
yeah, because we can have different perspectives between the bookkeeping side, and then it's like, what do I do with these numbers now that you
Right.
know that they're good? It's like we could have some recommendations and help business owners take
Yeah,
that next step to be profitable and grow.
exactly. I try to explain to my clients that you need both sides. It's like driving a car. You need to be able to look in the rearview mirror to see where you've been and what has happened. But then that gives you the tools to then look out the front window and actually chart where you're going to go and how to get
Exactly.
there. So it's
Exactly.
kind of like that. Just very briefly, I started Perrow Advisory Services in 2019 after a fairly eclectic career. I spent 10 years in HR with a strong focus on recruiting, then co-founded an IT services business. And I still believe I'm probably the least technical person to ever own an IT company. But I had a partner who did all things technical and I did all things else. So it was a great experience. We built that to 7 figures before I left, and the fell into property management, doing operations, bringing in. Paul, you had mentioned the importance of process, and that was my role was taking a successful 30-person company that had virtually no structure and no set systems and processes, and brought structure and organization to that. And by the time I left, 5 years later, we had 5 offices across the state, 85 employees. We more than doubled the number of units that we managed from 1,500 to 4,000. So it was a ride, to say the least. And now I feel like I'm doing what I was meant to do, which is helping other small business owners learn to navigate those journeys, and whether that's
Yep.
with internal employees or with using folks like yourself and Leanna, and um, making sure that they get the success, that they achieve the success that they deserve. Um, so I guess we can jump in a little bit more. 30%.
Yeah. So that 30%. So what does that represent? It can mean a lot of things, but basically, that's if you look at the small business statistics, that's the number of businesses who don't make it to the end of their second year, which is pretty sad, but it's the hard reality.
Mhm.
It's also the number of businesses that make it to their 10th anniversary. So half of all small businesses fall out that 5 year mark. And then, another percentage fall out. So in 10 years, most small businesses have closed up for some reason or other. It may not be financial. It could be because they were running ragged and they decided to hang it up. So I'm sure all of you guys don't want to be in that spot. And so that's why you're interested in learning more about what you can do. So um, there is hope, to get to that 30% of the businesses that make it beyond 10 years. There's a few more things I want to call out. A few more numbers is something that most people don't think about, especially small business owners, is like, oh, what about embezzlement? What's my odds of that? Surely that doesn't happen, but it actually happens more than you would think. And it can happen multiple ways, but typically when the processes are not clear and you don't have checks and balances, stuff happens. And when it happens, it's not pretty and can cause bankruptcies. You can see some statistics there on the slides. I won't go through and read them all, but
It's a little too depressing.
it's a little depressing.
Yeah.
But the key point is like, okay, how do we not fall in that category? And part of it is having, controls and processes, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But
Yeah,
it's just something to be aware of as a business owner. So
definitely. Yeah, I unfortunately know a few companies that have gone down that rabbit hole, and some survived, others did not. So,
yeah, yeah,
and it's really interesting because to me, it's some of the most trusting and good companies, owners end up falling victim.
yeah.
And
It
so
happens to the nice people. The
it
mean
does,
people, it doesn't happen to. So,
right?
yep. So,
Okay. So I'm going to go with some smaller numbers now, but no less depressing. 6.6% is the current core inflation rate. And even worse, when including all the items that we deal with on a day-to-day basis, it's actually closer to 8.2%. And if you add the cost of energy, um, which is 19.8% inflation just on energy, and food has gone up 11.2%. It's clear business is being significantly impacted. Um, it's something that's not, I mean, it's real. If anybody has thought about buying a house, or like you said, going to the grocery store, or anywhere, it's there now. And we have seen a greater rise in the last 18 months than in the last 5 years combined. It's kind of scary.
yeah. So, one of the things is to recognize we're in an inflationary environment now, and it's not going away anytime soon. At least that's the consensus. So you got to be creative. And how do we deal with that? And the key thing is follow a process and communicate with your customers and suppliers, because things are changing. You can see in those statistics, everybody's seeing an increase in cost. Most small business owners reported that they're relying on high fourth quarter sales to get them through. But if you look at the cost increase versus what the sales revenue or pricing increases on small businesses, it doesn't seem to quite line up. So it looks like, based on these latest surveys from a couple of months ago, that business owners, and what we're seeing it too in our customer base, is they seem to be eating into their profit margins at this
Yeah.
time. So
I think that's something, Paul, I'd like to just very quickly comment on, is that um, talking about increasing revenue, but because the costs are increasing higher or faster, then maybe your sales will, over the next quarter, the profit is actually going to be lower. And I think that's something that a lot of small business owners are still, still struggle to wrap their heads around.
yeah,
I know, man, I had a hard lesson on that many years ago. The difference between revenue and profit. And it can be scary, but once you crack that code, it can really
yeah, exactly. And
make a
so
huge difference in your business.
so knowing your numbers is the most important thing as a business owner.
Mhm.
And some people may have gotten into business because they like what they're doing in their business, the service or product they're providing. A large number of business owners kind of get into business ownership that way. There's a segment of business owners that are like, hey, I want to make money. I'm all about the business. It doesn't really matter what I sell or provide as a good or service. So you need to know where you are on that spectrum, and realize that knowing your numbers is going to be key to your long-term success. I mean, if you don't know your numbers, that's kind of the best predictability of
Yeah.
um, issues coming down the road. So we don't want to be caught off guard. How can we know our numbers? What does that mean? So there's cash flow, there's revenue versus profit, and every dollar that you sell could mean that you're losing money. You don't want to be in that scenario.
Mhm.
Fixed and variable costs. Those are the two things that, as a bookkeeping firm and fractional CFO, that we focus on with our customers, and understanding that and accounting for it properly. So you've got fixed cost, you got variable cost, you've got and a profit margin. So
Mhm.
you want to make a profit margin as a business owner. So how do you price your goods and services to be able to cover all of that? And the one thing that I always tell our customers is you have to know your pricing factor and do it on paper. What it basically says is, what is my total overhead fixed cost that I'm going to have regardless of how much I sell? What are my variable costs, the inputs into making a sale? And then how much profit do I plan to make out of this business? Is it 2%? Is it 5%? Is it, 10%? And
Mhm.
then you have to run the numbers to see if that works out to a market-based profit of or pricing of what your competitors are offering, because you obviously can on paper look good and make a
Right.
profit on paper, but if nobody's willing to buy your product or service at that level, then we've got a problem, right? So
Exactly.
you've
Will
got
you
to,
take a quick minute to explain um, fixed and variable costs? Because that's something that.
yeah, yeah. So my fixed cost. So if you've got a building, an office space, your rent, your mortgage, your light bill, your insurance, that's a pretty much a fixed cost. And when we say fixed cost, think about it on an annual time frame, or at least a 6 to 12 month period time frame, because obviously you can control some of those costs, but as you're building out your pricing model, you have to think about, how do I cover all these expenses that are going to be there regardless of how much I sell for this time period. So typically we think about it annually.
Mhm.
um, my employee cost, yes, it's variable. In some businesses you might have truly variable costs, but in reality most employee costs are fixed, because you're not going to fire anybody or lay people off next week just because you were slow on revenue for a few weeks.
Right.
So going through that exercise of determining what's fixed and truly variable, most of
Mhm.
the time we see people underestimate their fixed cost. Um,
Mhm.
and their variable cost is really like, okay, what's the cost of it's your cost of goods sold. Like if I'm a retailer of a product, well, how much do I have to buy in inventory to resell? That would be a
Right.
variable cost. Now, of
Perfect.
course, if you all that inventory sits on your shelves for a year or a couple of years, then yeah, it may not quite be so variable. It may be more than
Right.
that. So it's an exercise, and it varies by business and business type and business owner and how they manage the business. But anyways, you need to go through that exercise to determine those two buckets.
Exactly. Yeah. It's that was an important thing for me with the IT company, because we did a lot of package pricing. And so even though the service wasn't the actual people hours wasn't really a variable cost, that we counted employees as a fixed cost. We used tools that only got used if they were bought. If this a particular package was bought, and so we included those as a variable cost. So there's a lot that you can do with that, and it
Yeah,
helps
and
you
it
figure
does.
out where to
Yeah,
put your focus too.
and it doesn't. It's not going to be 100% accurate, so to speak. I mean,
Mhm.
ideal world it is, and it could argue either way. But anyways, the point is to go through the exercise and start somewhere with that.
Exactly.
And then to set your pricing, or at least your pricing target,
Hmm.
um, every dollar that you bring in, you've got to do three things with that dollar. Well, four things. One is you got to pay taxes or sales tax if you're a reseller.
Hmm.
Um, you got to cover your variable cost, and you got to have that allocation of that sale go towards your fixed costs for the entire year, right? So you have to have a pretty good estimate of what your sales are going to be for the year, um, as you go through this exercise. And so
Hmm.
if you think every dollar I bring in, I've got to cover those four things. Basically, you can do that with a simple formula of knowing your pricing. If you say, hey, what's my profit percentage that I want to make?
Hmm.
Well, let's say it's 5%.
Hmm.
What's my overhead percent of the business? And most businesses are going to run between 20 to 30%. It'll vary. Smaller one person businesses will of course be lower, but let's just say it's a 25% overhead. Well, if I got profit plus my overhead of 25%, that gives me 30% total. That's
Right.
going to be my pricing factor. So if I've got 30% pricing factor, my variable costs to set my price, I'm going to say, okay, what's my variable cost going for each sale that I make? And I
Mm-hmm.
take the sum of all those variable costs and divide it by my pricing factor of 30%. And
Mm-hmm.
that's going to give me the price that I've got to sell this thing at or provide the service at to cover my fixed overhead for the year allocated on an allocated basis, make a profit, and cover my variable cost.
Right.
So if you think about that, at least you will know what I got to do to be profitable.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and then
Take
it
some
comes
of the
into,
mystery out.
yeah, then you've got to deal with the market. Okay, so will the market support this price? If not, okay, I got to cut some costs somewhere. I got to be better on my variable cost, better on my fixed cost, or
Mhm.
either take a cut in profit. So it's going to come from one of those buckets. So
Uh-huh. That reminds me of the old CarMax commercial where they had the long balloon. It was like these are the only things that are involved with the price of a car, and if you squeeze one here, it's going to go up
yep,
over there.
yep. We're all trying to balance those factors.
Exactly.
So yeah, so what we refer to a lot of times is the three C's. Are your numbers current? Are they correct? And are they controlled? Because if you
Mhm.
can't trust your numbers, and if you ignore it, that's just setting up for a bad scenario in the future. So what does that really mean? Current, it was like, yeah, are they right for the time period? Are they correct? But controlled. So when you think about controlled, that really gives you into the aspect of, is this process smooth, or is everything a
Mhm.
fire drill?
Right.
To get my numbers, or to that goes to the process of the business side of things,
Okay.
so which is very important. um,
Right.
and then as a overall, another thing to think about from a finance side is the controls in the business. So business owners, they're going to have a process. So the question is,
Mhm.
what process is it? So you
Right.
can either say, hey, I want to hire somebody to do all that and just let them do it all and don't worry about it, on one extreme. Or then you have the guy, the business owner that says, I can't afford to hire anybody, so I'm just going to do everything.
Right. And so then they
And
do nothing.
yeah, so either that typically means, because they don't like doing books, they put it off to the last thing they do. And so it might get done at year end when the tax time and the CPA says, I need your stuff. um,
Exactly.
which just makes it headache for everybody and very expensive to do that way.
Right.
But for someone in the middle, that has a process and different employees doing different pieces of the processes, you want to make sure you have checks and balances in the system,
Mhm.
and try not to have one person wearing all the hats at the checks and balancing points between, bank reconciliations, your vendors, receiving payments, making the deposits,
Mhm.
the petty cash drawer at the business. All those things do add up, and having controls around
Yeah.
that's key. And then
I remember one of the first things I was taught was to have my bank statements mailed to my home.
yeah, so you can see that separate from the business. Yeah, so
Exactly. Before
because it might get
anything.
lost at the office, right?
Right.
You never get around to seeing it.
But it was so that it was removing one point of fudge factor,
Yep,
you know.
yep,
And,
yep.
so, yeah. And,
And then another control that I think we need to think about in this environment, with inflationary environment, is there's different ways to price, using your inventory,
mhm.
last in, first out, or the first one, first out. So in this type of inflationary environment, for your variable cost, we're recommending everyone to look at pricing from a first in, first out approach, because you can really kind of get behind the eight ball if you're viewing all your variable cost as something that you bought 6 months to a year ago and prices were much lower than they are now. So,
Oops.
and
I'm
then
so sorry.
yeah, so but anyway, so that's one of the things in the controls, is just to make sure that you don't neglect that, and
Yeah.
and um creating predictability around all of those processes is really what's going to set you apart as a business owner. And there's ways to do that and to get some help, doing that if needed. So Jennifer, do you want to talk about, the
Yeah.
the
So
three keys
creating,
there?
yeah, creating predictability. It really there are three pillars to any business: profit, people, and process. We've been talking about profit, um, the difference between what you bring in and what you actually keep at the end of the day. And the truth is, a business without profit is a hobby, and at the very least, a headache. So, our people, it's true, employees will make or break your business. And that happens in a lot of different ways, whether they are um, uh, doing incorrect activities, which is where the controls that you were discussing came in, or if they're following process. Now, process, if done well, really can be a competitive advantage. But that's only if your process is repeatable and someone coming new into the organization can learn it easily. It's how you manage the work. And if you have processes that are in place, then you can also use them to manage your people to the process. Helps a lot as well. Um, one of the keys or one of the key components to being able to develop the right processes is organizational structure. And I like to think of it like organizing your garage, or your junk drawer, or your attic, or your car, depending on your life. There are two primary ways to do that. The first is to group like items together and then put them in bins where it's labeled to be very clear that all of the gardening tools are in one bin, all of the balls are in another bin, all of the um, nails and fasteners of whatever sort are in another bin. This makes new items easy to store. And it also as you get something new, you just find the right bin and put it in there. And it also makes it easy to find items. You look for the right bin and it's going to be in there, versus if you've ever moved, which I've done way too many times, and you start cutting open the boxes knowing you put something in this box. It's not there. And that is more what happens with the second process, where you just pick a box or a bin and you start filling it, just getting stuff out of the way. And once that bin is full, then you go to the next box. And if you find some little pieces, little items, you look for boxes that aren't quite full and you stick them in there. And what happens is there's really no rhyme or reason to the contents. Your space looks great, but the next time you need to find something, it's gonna be a journey. The stuff in our garage is a lot like the work that needs to be done in our organizations. However, instead of organizing Christmas lights and gardening shears, we have invoicing and accounting and scheduling and service delivery and all the parts that go into running a business. So I'd like to encourage you to think about this organizational structure process. If you take the second approach that we discussed to organizing your work, and this is what most small businesses do, is as people come on board, we all wear different hats. And as you come on board, it's like, oh, well, you've got room to handle this new project. So now Susie is doing not only answering the phones and handling customer inquiries, but now we have an invoicing process that is a little bit more detailed. And so she's doing that. And then somebody has to be doing social media, and it all just kind of layers on. And at the end of the day, you decide everybody's full. They're full up, right? So you need a new person. Well, what kind of new person do you need? I don't know. So you kind of grab things that people are tired of doing and you throw them together and say, okay, we need this person. Um, what happens is it's really hard to find a person when to fill a jumbled mess of a job description. You know, to find someone that has all the skills, quote unquote, that you need for that randomized role. When they come on board, good luck trying to figuring out who to go to for what. So they're slower in their delivery and processes break. And this becomes most evident when someone leaves the organization and you're trying to replace them,
Yeah.
right? I can't tell you how many times, and you've probably seen this, where you have one person who is responsible for a very detail oriented, thought intensive process, such as bookkeeping. And they're also responsible for customer service, and which is a highly reactive, responsive role. And those two roles, by their definition, prevent the person from doing the other well, because you can't stop being reactive, right? To do your proactive work.
Yeah.
And if you're doing your proactive work and you have a reactive situation that you need to respond to, you know, who knows what you'll remember about where you were and how many times do you skip a step when you go back, or that type of thing. And trying to hire somebody who has strength in both of those is very hard. So what I recommend is that you look at it and take the first approach to organizing, where you put similar tasks together. In this scenario, I like to think of your bins as positions rather than people or roles. And so you put like work together in one role. You won't always have full-time positions this way, but you'll have positions that make sense. The smaller you are, the more likely you are to have one person cover multiple positions. But when they leave or when they become too busy, it's easier to peel off a chunk of work to give to the next appropriate person. It also makes it much easier when people come on board to understand processes and where to go, and makes it a lot easier to figure out how to hire the next person. How to create your organizational structure is, for me, the easiest is this visual process of creating an org chart. Most of us are familiar with org charts, the traditional organizational chart that is people-based, and you'll have your CEO and then all the different employees, and it reflects the reporting structure. A functional org chart is similar, except it's strictly focused on roles. Think of each of the boxes as a position or a role. And then the lines indicate the relationship between the roles, not necessarily the reporting structure of the individuals in the roles. I'm going to give you a template. This one, this is a standard org chart that just about every single company has these 4 roles. Right? You have the CEO, the visionary, the owner, the person in charge. All businesses have to find business. Yeah, they have the business of getting business, whether it's marketing, sales, or customer service. All businesses have to do the business of business, you know, their operations. How are they delivering their product or their service? And then support services manager. So think of support services as your back end. It's the HR, it's the IT, it's the accounting, it's all the pieces, parts that make what you're building not just a job, but actually an organization. Now, this is an example of a functional chart that is typical for companies in that solopreneur to 5 people. I do have samples of org charts for some larger companies, and I'm happy to share those with you later, so you can plan as you grow. But this one I thought was a really good way to show you kind of how to divvy up the roles. So in this is a consulting company, all right? And the CEO is the primary consultant. So yellow is the owner, right? Or is the owner. They do the CEO role. They head up business development. However, they have outsourced in green a marketing specialist who will help them figure out the right strategy, maybe does their daily or weekly posting if they're big into social media, that type of thing. But the actual sales calls are still handled by the owner of the company. Now, under operations, this CEO provides three primary types of services. They head up a peer group. They do peer group leadership. They have a group coaching program, and then they do one-on-one consulting. Now, the one-on-one consulting, they really do all by themselves. So there is no additional role attached. However, both the peer group leader and coaching program roles require extra layers of administrative work. And so this CEO has hired an individual to help with that. Think of this as your virtual assistant, perhaps, or a younger, or younger is not the right word, a more junior person who's getting into coaching, right? Now, support services, this is where, Paul, you were talking about how so often the owner will just say, I'll do it all, right? And then very little of it gets done. What I see, what we were talking about is that typically it's that in-house, they try to do all the bookkeeping, and they may hire an office coordinator, the person to answer the phones and answer the mail and do all of the little things that have to get done in a business. And then they'll outsource. Often we see they'll outsource IT support and HR support first. I think there's a good argument for outsourcing the bookkeeper role sooner rather than later, but that's a personal choice. So we've talked about how you organize your company, how you understand your numbers and know how to price and how to keep tabs on what's really going on to protect yourself from internal fraud, from external forces such as inflation. So now what? Where do we go from here? How can we take away the overwhelm? One of the first things you can do is identify where you can outsource or delegate different activities. So many business owners burn out before they hit their true success. And these are ways to head that off. Think about when you're doing an activity, what would the cost be to hire someone to do this for me versus my theoretical hourly rate? If you put so many hours into a day, how much of that impacts your revenue, right? And Paul, I don't know if there's a formula that you use for that or just.
Yeah, there's some different ways to think about it. And we've got a little white paper that we'll
Yeah.
email to everybody that goes more detail on it. I know it's about 1240, so
yeah,
I won't go into much detail.
So there is, so you can get more information on how to figure that out. Most often, early hires are that admin assistant, the phone or back office, like we talked about. Most common outsourced are that accounting and bookkeeping, payroll processing, marketing, and then the CPA. There's one thing that we know for sure in business, and that is that change is constant.
Yeah. It's going to be constant change. Exactly. And once you think you've got it figured out, it'll change. So,
Right.
but so to deal with that without getting wrapped up into all the details all the time, and you're little world of running your business, you really need to step outside and detach yourself to see the forest from the trees.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and have that sounding board to deal with the internal and external issues that you're
Mm-hmm.
facing in the business.
Right.
Uh, a lot of times that may be your spouse. Some spouses may not be set up to do that, or might be not be the
Mm-hmm.
best person for doing that. But you need to identify who's going that sounding board is going to be, and
Right.
make sure they're suited for having that role and helping you, and
Mm-hmm.
having an accountability partner. I mean, that's huge, because if you don't have the accountability partner, what you end up doing is doing what you like to do, and you don't do what you don't like to do. So,
Yep.
and then
Yep.
that means most business owners don't like doing the taxes, don't like doing, the bookkeeping details. And
Mm-hmm.
so they have a mess on their hands after a couple of years, which costs a lot of time and effort to clean up. So
Right.
you really can use that accountability partner to help you figure out, okay, what should I focus on,
Mm-hmm.
and what do I need to delegate or outsource or have someone else to do in the office. And
Exactly.
knowing when to revisit your processes and systems, because it's going to change as your business grows, or you have different product types or service offerings.
Yep. Yep.
And
I always say look for the bottleneck.
yep,
Where's the breakdown? And that's where you focus your energy.
as the business owner, and there will be, you don't want to have a business that everything's a fire drill. That just gets old really fast. So
Mhm. Yes. Exactly.
one side of the business from the structure and the process, and we like to help business owners on the financial accounting, and making sure they know how the business is performing from a financial side, and getting them to that point where they're comfortable that the numbers are right. And once you reach that stage, then you can be prepared to be profitable. So
Exactly. I had it's like using your numbers allows you to know where the gas pedal is and where the brake is in your business. And so once you have confidence in your numbers, if you need to increase or grow, you know what pedals to push, right? And if something is getting out of control, you can very easily tell, okay, where do I need to tap the brakes a bit and stop and reevaluate. So the
yeah.
numbers are key. And I use them a lot in helping my clients figure out the people and process side. So, well, I want to thank everybody for coming today. You've got our contact information. Please reach out to either or both of us. We're happy to um, run ideas, run through some scenarios with you or whatever. And thank you again for joining us. And cheers to a most successful end of 2022.
All right, thank you. Thanks, Jennifer.
Thank you all.
All right.
Bye-bye.